One day, perhaps soon, the British people will be asked to vote on whether they wish to abandon their national currency, the pound sterling, and join the euro. Tony Blair has stated that if 5 economic tests are passed, he will recommend abandoning the pound in favour of the euro. Why? Why are we being urged to abandon something that has been ours for centuries, has worked well for us, and still does? This video will try to clarify what we, the British people, are being asked to decide by considering 4 crucial questions. What is economic and monetary union? Does a single currency work? What would life be like in the Eurozone? And are the 5 economic tests relevant, or do they hide an intended change in the British way of life so profound our own politicians are afraid to discuss it? Economic and monetary union is a giant step in the creation of a European federal superstate in which Britain, along with the other countries already in the Eurozone, will cease to exist. As Otmar Issing of the European Central Bank candidly pointed out, the 11 countries whose currencies have been replaced by the euro have ceased to exist as separate territories. There is no more Germany, no more France, no more Belgium. There is simply Europe. So the euro is an integral part of the federal plan, yet our own politicians of whatever party continue to hide this fact from us. Harold Wilson seriously misled the British public when he wrote in the 1975 referendum pamphlet there was a threat from the movement in the common market towards an economic and monetary union which could have forced us to accept fixed exchange rates. This threat has been removed. Wilson knew that Heath had already agreed to the principle of EMU when signing the Treaty of Rome in 1972. In that same year, Geoffrey Rippon, in a letter to the European Council, promised, "We are prepared to envisage an orderly rundown of official sterling balances after our accession to the common market, to achieve progress towards economic and monetary union." On the 1st of January 1999, the euro was introduced and the exchange rates of 11 national currencies were irrevocably fixed against it. Greece joined later. Britain, Sweden and Denmark did not join. 3 years later, euro coins and notes were introduced and, more importantly, 12 national currencies were destroyed. For those countries now using the euro, economic and monetary union is complete, their economies subject to control from the European Central Bank. An example of what this means was graphically described in 2000 by Kenneth Clark, speaking at an investment conference in Jersey, when he said, "Your problem is that you cannot control your economy and the inflation rate when you have no control over interest rates. In fact, your situation is just like Ireland and other smaller nations in the Eurozone." I'd better not say any more. The European Central Bank, or ECB, is situated in Frankfurt. The executive board of the bank consists of a president, vice president, and 4 other members, each with 1 vote. The powers of the European Central Bank include, first, setting the limits on interest rates, growth and inflation across the Eurozone in a one-size-fits-all policy. Those limits are defined in the Stability and Growth Pact. Second, exclusive rights to authorize the issuing of banknotes and coins. Third, holding and managing the official foreign reserves of the Eurozone countries. The priority of the ECB is to deliver price stability. This means pursuing policies to control inflation irrespective of the economic needs or wishes of individual member states, even if it destroys jobs. The 6 members of the ECB are political appointees and hold office for between 4 and 8 years. They are not elected by, nor are they accountable to, the EU electorates nor their governments. Article 107 of the Maastricht Treaty dictates that the ECB must not take instructions from or be influenced by the governments of member states or their central banks. The European Central Bank decides on its own targets and does not publish these figures or its deliberations for 16 years, as its proceedings, quote, "shall be confidential," close quote. That is the system that will govern Britain economically if we decide to abandon the pound sterling. So do single currencies work? There have been numerous attempts to introduce single currencies, including these. All fail. Argentina is now virtually bankrupt because it tied its currency to the US dollar and there appears to be a knock-on effect with neighbouring Uruguay. The two previous attempts by the EU to lock currencies together both failed, the ERM in spectacular and costly fashion. Once sovereign states experience economic problems that affect the well-being of their peoples, the temptation to throw over a single currency becomes overwhelming, and eventually that's what happens. But the 12 nations already in the euro have no such easy escape route. They have abandoned their national currencies, handed over their reserves to the ECB, and no longer control interest and exchange rates. In effect, they can do nothing, even if the one-size-fits-all policy of the European Central Bank is causing financial hardship or destroying jobs. As Romano Prodi, the president of the EU Commission, said of EMU in January 2002, there is no escape hatch for countries wanting to leave EMU, even if they subsequently found that it was not compatible with their economies. It's a definite marriage. You cannot leave the Eurozone once you're in. After 3 years, the 12 nations in the Eurozone are experiencing the same old familiar problems long associated with a single currency. Unemployment, taxes, and inflation are all higher in the zone than in the UK, whilst outside the Eurozone, Britain enjoys higher levels of foreign inward investment, economic growth, and international export success. Let's look at just 3 of the individual problems now surfacing across Euroland. First, Germany is in deep recession and wants interest rates cut. Ireland, on the other hand, wants higher interest rates in order to dampen down inflation. Under the one-size-fits-all policy, the European Central Bank cannot possibly set a rate that will satisfy both. The same problem, to a greater or lesser extent, applies to all 12 of the Eurozone countries. Secondly, in July 2002, Portugal became the first country in the Eurozone to begin losing control of its own budget after it failed to comply with the Stability and Growth Pact. The Portuguese people now face long-term austere economic measures directly supervised from Brussels. Finally, and ironically, the Stability and Growth Pact, designed to hold the single currency together by controlling money supply and government spending, is being weakened. Germany, France and Italy all intimated in July 2002 that they would challenge the strict guidelines of the pact as they struggle to comply with its limits. The credibility and future of the pact is now in serious question, and with it, the continued existence of the euro. So what would be the effect if Britain joined? The decision to join the single currency would be both permanent and irrevocable. There would be no going back. Felipe González, former Prime Minister of Spain, describes joining the single currency as the greatest abandonment of sovereignty since the foundation of the European community. Currently, the British economy is controlled by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, an elected MP directly accountable to Parliament. He is assisted by the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England, which sets interest rates and manages the economy in the way best suited to Britain's needs. The minutes of MPC meetings are published within a month. Entering into full economic and monetary union means Britain losing the ability to control independent, flexible interest and exchange rates with monetary policies geared to meet our national economic requirements. Those controls will be handed over to the unelected, unaccountable, and largely unknown officials of the European Central Bank, who will not take into account the particular needs of Britain. In short, once in the euro, we would have absolutely no control at all over our own economy. An indication of how things might be can be drawn from our experience in the exchange rate mechanism mentioned earlier. John Major took Britain into the ERM in October 1990. This involved the artificial rigging of interest and exchange rates at levels that proved quite unsuitable for the British economy. During the ensuing 23 months of membership, Britain suffered its worst business recession in 60 years. Over 100,000 companies went bankrupt. Unemployment doubled to 3 million. Over 1 million house owners went into negative equity, and Britain lost £68 billion in reserves. Eventually, on Black Wednesday, Britain was forced out of the ERM to avoid national bankruptcy. Almost immediately, economic recovery began. since when Britain has experienced 8 years of sustained growth, averaging 3% per year, double that of Germany. Britain's business cycle is not like those in the Eurozone. It is unique to us as a global trading nation and has much more in common with the US than any other EU country. In addition, Britain does more trade with America and Asia than any other EU nation. In short, the British economy, British interest rates, and British exchange rates move much more in step with those of the US, our largest trading and investment partner, than with those on the continent of Europe. But what would happen if we did join? There are both short and long-term costs to consider. Immediately upon joining, there will be a conversion period when all banknotes and coins would be changed. Every means of charging or transferring money would need converting. There would be a cost to government, private industry, and the public estimated to be anywhere between 36 and 100 billion pounds, almost 10% of all the wealth we create in a year. The government's plans for the euro are now officially classified as secret. Despite not having the support of the British people for joining the euro, the government has already spent at least £63 million on euro preparation and continues to spend £37,000 of taxpayers' money each and every day. NHS hospital trusts estimate they will be starved of over £400 million and thousands of staff will have to be redeployed to handle any changeover to the euro with no discernible benefit to patients. Prices will be rounded up. Since the introduction of notes and coins on the 1st of January 2002, prices have leapt across the Eurozone, in some cases by 40%. Taxes would increase. The Treaty of Maastricht states quite plainly that the EU, quote, will adopt provisions for tax harmonisation, close quote. This would include VAT on house purchases and a transaction tax, neither of which exist in the UK, plus VAT at 15% on items now zero rated in Britain. More importantly, the power to raise taxes would increasingly be transferred to Brussels, eventually becoming the sole responsibility of the EU and not Westminster. Hans Tietmeyer, former president of the German Bundesbank, has stated, "It is an illusion to think that states can hold on to their autonomy over taxation policies." The UK's gold and dollar reserves and our oil industry would become EU assets, and the UK would have to take on the unfunded pension liabilities of the continental countries, currently estimated at over £1,200 billion. That's over £20,000 for every man, woman and child in Britain. We also know that once inside the Eurozone, the UK would be forced to comply with EU exchange controls as they were reimposed. Increasingly tighter restrictions would be set on citizens trying to move money or assets out of the EU. In the longer term, if Brussels is to govern the planned European federal superstate in the same manner as the United States, it will require at least a similar budget to the American government, which is 25% of GDP. This would mean, on current figures, Britain's annual gross contribution to the EU rising considerably, possibly tenfold. Ruth Lee, head of the policy unit at the Institute of Directors, sums up the dangers thus. Euro membership is, without exaggeration, tantamount to handing the economy over from British institutions to EU-wide ones, which cannot be as sensitive to the requirements of the British economy as British institutions can be. This risks economic instability. It risks boom and bust. We're told there are a number of advantages in membership of the single currency. Let's look at them for a moment. They claim it will make conditions easier for those businesses that trade with the EU by eliminating trading costs. In fact, the European Commission itself has found that there would be a saving for UK companies of around 0.1% of GDP, about £1 billion a year. It would take, therefore, at least 40 years to recover even the lowest estimate of the initial conversion costs. In addition, barely 15% of all the companies in Britain deal with companies elsewhere in the EU. But the other 85% would still have to convert and comply with the thousands of EU directives and regulations, despite having nothing at all to do with the EU. Verdict, no real advantage. They claim there will be price transparency across the EU. The claim that by pricing everything in euros, differences in prices will vanish has already been proved unfounded. Even after 3 years, prices continue to differ from country to country throughout the Eurozone, just as they do within each country, and so they should if competition is operating effectively. Alison Cottrell is a council member of Britain in Europe, yet even she has admitted, quote, the internet, credit cards and competition policy could have produced most of the benefits of transparency with none of the upheaval, close quotes. Verdict, no advantage. They claim the euro would bring about exchange rate stability. Less than half our exports go to EU countries. Most go to the USA and Commonwealth countries. So the dollar is more important to the British economy than the euro. Any stability within the eurozone would be more than offset for Britain by increased volatility with the rest of the world. Verdict, no advantage. They claim tourists wouldn't have to change their currency. This would be a minuscule advantage, barely measurable except by the holidaymakers themselves. Of course, it wouldn't apply in 94% of the countries of the world, including North and South America, Australasia, Africa, the Middle East, the Far East, Japan, China, nor in most of Europe. Verdict, limited advantage. Before recommending abandoning the pound, the present government has set 5 economic tests which have to be met. They are, first, permanent convergence of EU and UK economies. Second, is there sufficient flexibility? Third, would joining EMU encourage investment in Britain? Fourth, would joining be good for the city? And fifth, would joining be good for the economy and jobs? Test 1, convergence. Convergence can never be permanent. Fundamentally different economies like ours and the rest of the EU move in and out of recession and sustain growth at different levels and over different periods of time. They move past each other continuously, like ships in the night. The very idea of convergence is an unrealistic, bureaucratic daydream. Result, can never be met. Fails. Test 2, flexibility. Flexibility means labour mobility, people moving around the EU for jobs, and wage flexibility, or both. At present, the UK has a high level of flexibility, unlike the Eurozone, which is beset with regulation and fails on both counts. Result, fails. Test 3, investment. In 1997, when it was clear that the UK would not join EMU, overseas investment into the UK went up by 40%. Most inward investment, 70%, is orientated towards the UK and not Euroland. Result, fails. Test 4, the city. Since the introduction of the euro, the City of London has continued to dominate the international currency markets, actually gaining business by being independent of the eurozone. David Lascelles says in his book Confidence in the City Outside the Euro that entry into EMU would bind the city to, quote, cultures which have no sustained track record of running successful free markets, all of which could spell death for the city, close quote. Result, fails. Test 5, growth, stability and jobs. Since leaving the ERM in 1992, the UK has enjoyed low inflation, a stable currency, a thriving economy, and has created more jobs than the whole of the rest of the EU put together. Result, fails. At present, British membership of the euro fails all 5 tests, a view supported by a number of reports, including the Barclays Capital Report of June 2001, which concluded, quote, our work suggests that these tests, 2 to 5, will not be passed over the next 5 years, close quote. The Chancellor of the Exchequer told Parliament that he would recommend Britain's joining the euro only if it were, quote, clear and unambiguous, close quote, all 5 tests had been passed. This is a standard of objective measurement impossible to reach. Economics can never be clear and unambiguous. Ultimately, it will be a political decision. This, according to Gus O'Donnell, head of macroeconomics at the Treasury. And Sir Alan Budd, former senior economic advisor at the Treasury, said, the final question, is this in our economic interest, cannot be answered clearly and unambiguously. But there is a crucial 6th test, one that's never mentioned. the rate of exchange at which the pound would be expected to join the euro. This key figure would not be set by the British government. After consultation with the European Council, the Commission, and the other member states in the single currency, setting the entry rate would be exclusively the province of the ECB, which would almost certainly set the rate as high as possible to benefit the other 14 members of the EU. They would have no incentive to do otherwise. On economic grounds alone, there does not appear to be a case for Britain joining. In fact, the opposite. Every impartial view is that to join the single currency would be an enormous risk for Britain that far outweighs any realistic advantage. Perhaps Peter Jay, former economics editor of the BBC, identified the real reason for membership of Economic and Monetary Union when he wrote, "A single currency implies, before long, a single country. Therefore, British adoption of the euro cannot, in the long run, be reconciled with British political independence." The influential Institute of Directors agrees, stating, "Economic and Monetary Union is a political project and the most integrationist development in the history of the European Union. The euro is a significant step towards the unification of Europe." This, then, is the true purpose behind the campaign to abandon our national currency. Far from being just an economic change, membership of the euro is, in reality, a momentous political development, locking the British people still further into a federal system of government for which their approval has never been sought. British politicians over the past 30 years have refused to discuss the constitutional implications of our involvement with the European Union. That refusal continues over possible membership of EMU. Ruth Lee of the Institute of Directors again, she concludes that continental politicians are quite unequivocal about the political nature of the euro. Their honesty is in sharp contrast to the dissembling dishonesty surrounding the debate in the UK. According to a report in The Times, Tony Blair has repeatedly said that membership of the single currency is not a constitutional issue. Compare that statement with what continental politicians freely admit. Karl Otto Pohl, former president of the Deutsche Bundesbank, recently said, "The majority here in Britain are reluctant to give up their rights of sovereignty. But if they joined EMU, that would be the consequence." Otmar Issing again has said, "The euro is a political project in an economic wrapper," whilst Romano Prodi has declared, "The roof of the EU superstate is on, the walls are going up, and the foundation is the euro." When euro notes and coins were introduced, Prodi added, "This is not economic, this is a pure political project." Others have confirmed the political nature of the euro. Gerhard Schroeder of Germany said, "The introduction of the euro is probably the most important integrating step since the beginning of the unification process. National sovereignty will soon prove itself to be a product of the imagination." And the French politician Jacques Lang said, "With the creation of the euro, the halfway stage for federalism would be reached. Only one institution is missing, a federal government." So what might we conclude from all this? Britain has a population of over 58 million people and is the fourth largest economy in the world. Several dozen smaller nations, including the 275,000 people in Iceland, are more than managing to thrive perfectly well on their own, and they're all smaller than us. There is not one shred of evidence to suggest we need to be part of the Eurozone to survive or maintain jobs. Quite the contrary. We are already better off out. We don't even have to be part of the EU to trade with it. One example, and there are many, of a non-EU country prospering outside the EU is Norway. It sends 74% of its exports to the EU, but has kept its identity, sovereignty, parliament, fishing waters, oil, way of life, and is the second most prosperous nation in Europe. The pound sterling has been our national currency for centuries. It is one of the top three long-established international currencies, along with the dollar and the yen. The pound defines our British identity and protects our freedom to be independent and self-governing. Joining the single currency means a massive handover of power from our elected government in Westminster to the unelected, unaccountable officials in Brussels and Frankfurt. The Chancellor, Gordon Brown, said in July 2002 that the decision to join EMU, quote, is not just momentous but irreversible, close quote. At present, however, the British Constitution contains the principle that no Parliament shall bind its successors. This protects future generations from being inhibited or disadvantaged by the mistakes of previous generations. Irreversible membership of the single currency directly conflicts with that ancient and priceless safeguard. This is a fundamental constitutional conflict that has been studiously avoided by all three political parties. Far from being just a move that would make trade easier or doing away with the need to change holiday money, our own politicians are hiding the fact that membership of the single currency is a cornerstone in the construction of a federal European state, a state in which Britain would cease to exist as a nation. Joining would destroy the very core of our freedom as an independent democratic people. William Gladstone in 1891 warned, if the House of Commons by any possibility lose the power of the control of the grants of public money, depend on it, your very liberty will be worth very little in comparison. If you're ever asked to vote in a referendum on the euro, remember, it's not inevitable. You do have a choice. Ask yourself this. Do you want to share your bank account, your checkbook, and your credit cards with 14 neighbours, perhaps even more later? Are you willing to share with them everything you own, all your assets? Are you willing to become liable for all their past and future debts? Will you mind if they spend your money as their own? And will you mind when they tell you how much you can spend, when you can spend it, and on what? Because joining the euro will mean just that for every one of us.